Future Warrior, Earth's Children. Chapter 3. Stalker pulled the thin metal rod back out of the barrel of his ASBR-103 and examined the cleaning patch attached to the end. The patch was clean, the only discoloration a slight yellowish tinge coming from the lubricating fluid he had applied. Satisfied, he placed the barrel on the cloth next to him and picked up the rifle's action. Using a small brush, he started at one end of the action and carefully worked his way through it from top to bottom, removing any contamination that had worked its way into the weapon. After another careful brush and lubrication, the action joined the barrel on the cloth and the rest of the rifle's components were cleaned and inspected. Outside the open hangar, men and material were in constant motion. Tactical transports landed carrying the sweep units from the 76th Infantry Division back to the airbase, designated UEF Curtain. The tired infantry immediately descending on the hangars to get out of the punishing sun, the shaded hangars quickly filling up with the prone figures of resting soldiers. Stalker, however, was immune to the noise and movement, instead focusing entirely on the task at hand. The rifle now cleaned and stripped, Stalker closed his eyes and took a breath. Holding his breath, he began to reassemble the weapon by feel alone. The seconds ticked by slowly, and his chest began to burn, his lungs crying out for air. Ignoring his body's demands, Stalker's hands moved with steady confidence, and a moment later, with a snap, the last component was attached. Stalker stood, and still keeping his eyes closed and his breath held, he brought the rifle up to his shoulder, chamber round, and fired. He was rewarded with a click, and he opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Not bad at all. Almost as good as me. Stalker grinned at Link, who was standing directly in his line of fire, the barrel pointed at his chest. I can only aspire to your levels of greatness, Link. Stalker worked the rifle's action and ejected the dummy training round he had used, catching it nimbly in one hand. Link sat next to him and began stripping his Eliminator AMR, the powerful sniper rifle being reduced to a pile of components in seconds. As Link worked on his Eliminator, Stalker began cleaning his sidearm, the Z8A pistol. Stalker concealed a smile as Link lovingly cleaned even the smallest part of his rifle, handling the weapon's pieces gently, as if they were alive and not metallic alloy and plastic. You caress that rifle like that your missus might get jealous, you know. Link looked sideways at Stalker, but never stopped working. I would be more worried about the rifle getting jealous. This lady was a part of my life long before Janet was, Link chuckled. The smile abruptly slipped from Link's face. I haven't seen her in a while. I hope she's okay. She's still serving in the fleet? Link nodded. Yes, she's been on patrol along the border of the Groombridge systems. Been out of system for 2 weeks now. Stalker put a hand on his friend's shoulder. From what I hear, Vice Admiral Matsuda is an excellent commander. He'll bring her home safe and sound. Link slowly nodded, not fully convinced. You heard from Zoe lately? Stalker shook his head. Not for a week. The slipstreamers have been tied up running civilian replenishment missions since our honeymoon. A lot of people still needing help, especially in the worst-hit areas. Link nodded sagely. They had both seen the damage done by the Deimos attack firsthand. Countless people had lost their homes, and civilian infrastructure remained under strain as work crews operated around the clock to repair essential services. Aliens or human, it made little difference in war. Civilians always suffered. Well, I guess the only real question is what have our betters got lined up for us next. I think I can answer that, Link. Both Link and Stalker turned in surprise to the voice behind them. It was a voice they recognized. The voice belonging to their friend and commander of the 2nd Terra Nova, Assault Commander Richard Donaldson, known to his friends as the Big D, or simply D. The three shook hands and exchanged greetings, D joining them on their bench. How are your boys, Stalker? They're good, D, still keen for the fight. What do you need? D smiled. No more fighting for the moment. News from TACCOM. We've been recalled. The Terra Nova's going home. We're going back to Chile. The half-formed smile slipped from Stalker's face, being replaced by surprise. We're being stood down and returned to Arica, said Link in an aggrieved voice. No, replied D, his voice even but firm. The orders have been confirmed by Alpha 1 himself. We are to consolidate, re-equip, and prepare for imminent offensive operations. You mean, Link said, his voice trailing off. That's right, boys and girls. Something big is brewing. Soon we will begin to take back what is ours. Dee paused and looked both Stalker and Link in the eye, his expression deadly serious. I spoke to Alpha 1 only half an hour ago. This one's going to be big. When the offensive starts, he and the other Assault Division top hats want the Assault Divisions to be at the forefront, and so do I. The qualifying and vetting of new recruits at Eureka has been progressing well, but we are running out of time. That's where you two come in. I want you back at Eureka as soon as possible. The trainers there have been working wonders. I want you and Link to oversee the 2nd Terra Nova's new recruits' final integration into the regiment. What I hear from the trainers is true, they're good. Make them better. I don't know when we will be kicking off, but it will be soon, and we'll need everyone we can put in the field in the fight that coming. In the following days, the Terra Nova's scattered formations converged on Eureka. The sprawling military complex that made up UEA Eureka was situated on the edge of the Andes Mountains on the northern border of the Chilean province, and was within sight of the azure blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. Near the base was the city of Eureka itself, a serpent-like collection of buildings that followed the contours of the coastline. Near the city's center was the Morro de Eureka, the Rock of Eureka, a steep rocky hill some 139 meters above sea level and surrounded by sheer cliffs on 3 sides. The hill's imposing figure brooded over the city like a great stone fortress looking out to sea for invaders. The hill itself had indeed served as a defensive position throughout history, including notably in 1880 when Chilean forces captured it from Peru in the Guerra del Pacifico, the War of the Pacific. After their arrival at Eureka, Stalker and Link launched into bringing the 21st Terra Nova back to full strength and combat readiness. Dee had been accurate in his description of the new recruits, and those that had passed the initial screening proved to be in high spirits. All of them having volunteered for service with the Terra Nova after time spent recovering from injuries or after their old units had been disbanded or reformed. Under Stalker and Link's watchful gaze, and with the supervision of the company's unit commanders, the reformed 21st Company came together quickly. The new members learning fast from the veterans. After refreshing the recruits' basic skills and familiarizing them with the various weapons and equipment used by the assault forces, the focus switched to unit-level training. Individual units, training in standalone unit and sub-unit tactics. This was followed by training in multiple unit and company-level combat tactics, including combined arms and mechanized operations in conjunction with armored vehicles from the 9th Terra Nova. Finally, the training switched to specialization. Individual soldiers being further qualified in skills such as demolition, intelligence gathering, combat triage, communications, forward air control, and artillery spotting. Stalker lost track of the weeks as they rolled by, every waking hour spent with Link, Waters, and the rest of the CCU going over progress reports, refining training routines, and coming up with new ways to challenge the men under their command. New ways to prepare them for the fighting they knew was coming. Stalker and Link started their days early, rising before sunrise for their daily jog around the base's perimeter. Stalker couldn't help but notice that even at that hour the base still hummed with activity. Transports continued to come and go as bit by bit the division's new and refurbished combat equipment and vast arsenal of supplies was transferred to the gathering armada in orbit. Units of men in PT gear exercised, and others, alone or in small groups, were also out jogging in the brisk early morning air. One morning, though, the routine abruptly changed. Stalker had just emerged from the showers after his jog when he saw he had a message from TACCOM awaiting his attention. Stalker snatched it up, expecting orders to assemble for war. The content of the message, however, was a surprise. The entire division was given leave for 6 days. All personnel were also to be issued with express travel permit that allowed them to hitch rides on military transports planet-wide. Stalker read the message twice before it sunk in. There could be only one reason for such apparent generosity. The long-awaited counteroffensive could only be days away. As Stalker strode into the office that served as the 21st Terra Nova's CP, looking for Link, he received his second shock of the morning. Sitting at his desk, wearing a broad, warm smile, was Zoe. Zoe stood up and threw Stalker a perfect salute. "Morning, Battle Commander. Morning, Pilot Commander," Stalker managed to reply as he stood frozen in place. Stalker broke first, and taking 3 steps threw his arms around his wife and kissed her tenderly. The moment all the more special due to the complete surprise of the reunion. After what felt like a long time, Stalker reluctantly released his grip on Zoe. "What are you doing here, Princess?" Zoe flashed a winning smile. "My squadron has been issued 6 days' leave. I received the orders last night, so I caught the first transport here to see my husband." Stalker hugged Zoe again, the smell of her skin and her hair intoxicating after so long apart. After a moment, Stalker looked around and noticed that Link's desk was empty, something highly unusual for Link, who has always somehow managed to beat Stalker to the CP. Stalker was just about to ask if Zoe had seen him when Link walked in through the door arm in arm with a beautiful woman with flowing auburn hair and strikingly green eyes. Stalker instantly recognized her as Janet Combs. Janet had been the sole survivor from the UES Cerberus and had been rescued by Link after she had been stranded on Pavonis Prime. A vivacious woman with a steady nerve and tenacious character, Janet had pursued Link ever since they first met. The two had formed a close bond, the wilder Janet complimenting the quieter Link. The group exchanged greetings, Stalker and Link finding out that Zoe and Janet had arranged to arrive at Eureka on the same transport. Janet and Zoe having become fast friends since their first meeting. In dribs and drabs, the rest of the CCU arrived at the CP, all of them being surprised to find that they were on leave effective immediately, all realizing what it meant. As the group chatted, the members of the CCU gathering around Janet and Zoe, Stalker led Link to a quiet corner. Janet got 6 days leave as well. Link nodded sagely. "Yep, same as Zoe. Janet doesn't know any more than us, but the fleet is gathering. They're not trying to hide it. I guess Stratcom knows it's too big to conceal anyway," Stalker said, keeping his voice low. "You realize, boss, that Zoe's squadron must be being deployed as part of the expeditionary force." Stalker glanced as Zoe, who was busy chatting to Lee Waters. "You Link, I know. She has her duty, and I have mine. We have always known that. I trust her. She's a hell of a pilot. And after all we went through on Mars and in Germany, I'm not going to start worrying now." Stalker and Link made their way back to the group to find it already breaking up, everyone heading to hurriedly organize trips and make calls to loved ones. The question on everyone's mind was what to do with the 6 days' grace they had been granted. Stalker didn't want to stray too far from Eureka. Command came with responsibilities, and both he and Link needed to be able to return to duty quickly if the situation changed. "Why don't we head up Alaka for a few days, camp out, do some hiking?" Stalker's suggestion got instant approval, especially Zoe and Janet, neither of whom had seen the natural wonders of the region before. 2 hours later, the group set out in a civilian 4-wheel drive vehicle, the group choosing to hire a car rather than commandeer a military one so as to not attract the attention of any other sightseers. Their spirits were high as they left the city of Eureka and headed northeast along the Luda Valley. 6 days feeling like a lifetime of freedom after the long weeks of intense preparation. In their excitement, none of the 4 passengers in the car, Stalker, Link, Zoe, or Janet, noticed another vehicle falling behind them as they left the outskirts of Eureka, the driver careful to keep his distance. Less than 2 hours later, the group found themselves approaching Lake Chang'era in the Laka National Park. Over 6 kilometers long at its widest point, Lake Chang'era was an oasis in an otherwise predominantly desert landscape. Its shallow waters were a deep shade of emerald green, and its shores lined with marshy swamp that supported an abundance of wildlife, from species of waterbirds, including ducks and colorful flamingos, to herds of llamas, guanacos, and alpacas. The wildlife wasn't what drew the visitors' eyes, however, and instead all were immediately drawn to the north beyond the lake, to the towering snow-topped cones of Mount Parinacota and Pomerape. Parinacota and its nearby sister Pomerape were the twin snow-capped jewels of Laka. Both were stratovolcanoes, meaning that they were tall and shaped in the classic conical shape associated with volcanoes in the popular imagination. Rising to almost the exact same height of between 6,300 and 6,200 meters and separated by only 2.5 kilometers, the two monoliths dominated the landscape. Considered active in geological terms, both had last erupted during the first half of the 1st century CE, the debris from the eruptions having formed Lake Chang'era. Looking at them, the group had one thought in mind: getting to the top. First, however, they had to hike in and make a base camp. Leaving the car in a parking area near the lake, the two couples set out on foot to cover the 12 kilometers to the valley between the two volcanoes, the location they had chosen for the base camp. All were dressed in thick civilian extreme weather clothes with hiking boots and carrying heavy backpacks. The terrain was uneven and rough, but the scenery more than made up for the hard going, and they were in no hurry. As they walked, Stalker took in the landscape with the eye of an experienced soldier. It was late in the season and the area was deserted, although a couple of other vehicles in the car park at the lake did suggest that a couple of groups may have been somewhere in the park. The wind had an icy edge to it, and the snow line on the slopes of the two volcanoes had dropped lower as the air cooled for the onset of the Andean winter. While overhead the sky was a brilliant clear blue, with only small wisps of high cloud breaking the scenic vista. As they walked, Stalker noticed that linked to his scrutinizing the landscape, the combat soldier's instinct to search for threats dying hard. The terrain, though, despite its unevenness, was void of trees or large rocky outcrops. The barren brown landscape providing excellent visibility in every direction. It was after midday when they arrived between the volcanoes, too late for an ascent, so they set up their camp and spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the myriads of small lakes formed by ancient eruptions to the west of the volcanoes. As the sun began its plunge to the horizon, the group returned to the relative comfort of the base camp. The camp consisted of two spacious tents spaced apart to allow the couple some privacy. Between the two tents was a small portable stove, table, and set of 4 ultralight fold-out chairs. The equipment had rented from the vehicle hire company, and despite being far from new, it was of high quality. The chairs feeling better than the highest quality recliners to the group as they fell gratefully into them. As they settled down to cook a meal, Stalker began to feel himself relax. He was relieved at the solitude of the location, the icy desert air seeming to refresh his body. Stalker soaked in the apparent isolation. Just the 4 of them and the volcanoes towering either side. It was, however, an illusion. Far beyond visual range, eyes were watching them, aided by advanced optical binoculars. The eyes were cold, seemingly void of doubt or pity, and yet they burned with inner fire. The eyes of a fanatic. That night after dinner, Stalker, Link, Zoe, and Janet noticed a small light appear across the valley just up the slope of Pomerape. Stalker frowned in slight annoyance as he looked at the small, innocuous light, the aurora of solitude broken. A bit late to be setting up camp, isn't it? Stalker nodded in agreement to Link. Yeah, some people have no sense of timing. Stalker looked at the light again as they began to retire to bed in preparation for an early morning start. His expression was neutral, but his innate sense of logic was clawing at his subconscious. Something didn't feel right. Stalker opened his eyes. Zoe's breathing had slowed and become rhythmic. Her body felt warm against his, the warmth seductive against the cold air. Pushing through the urge to remain where he was, Stalker gently extricated himself from the 2-person thermal sleeping bag, leaving Zoe asleep. As he pushed the tent's flaps back and stepped outside, Stalker's body was assaulted by the biting cold of the icy winds sweeping across the Atacama Desert. His body shivered on reflex, his skin becoming immediately covered in tiny goosebumps. Under his feet, the gravelly ground crunched alarmingly as he stepped out and away from the tent. Stalker looked up and stretched. Above him, the sky was crystal clear, the entire plethora of stars burning brightly, the celestial image unhampered by artificial lights or pollution. As he looked back down, Stalker glanced around and saw a dark figure standing motionless by the other tent. For a moment, apprehension rose in Stalker before he recognized the familiar height and shape of the figure. Stalker strode over, stopping alongside the still motionless Link. "You're up early, Link. It's not even midnight yet," Stalker whispered. "Can't sleep," Link said simply, his gaze never wavering from the dark shape of Mount Pomerape. Stalker glanced down and spied a familiar lump on his friend's thigh. "I thought I was just being paranoid. Too much time spent at war. But you sense it as well, don't you?" Link just nodded, not replying. Both gazed out into the darkness, their warrior's instinct telling them that something wasn't right, that somehow the light they had seen earlier was a sign of trouble to come. "Maybe we should pay them a visit, see who they are," Link said idly. The idea had crossed Stalker's mind, but he had decided against it. "Nah, we'll play it cool. I'm still hoping it's nothing and we're overreacting and it's just some hikers running late." Link nodded. "Want me to take first watch?" Stalker smiled. "That's all right, Link. You go back to bed, I've got it. I'll wake you in 4 hours. You want this, boss?" Link tapped the Z88 pistol strapped to his thigh in a tactical holster. "Got it under control, Link," Stalker said, touching his own pistol in a similar thigh holster. "Now go back to bed before Janet realizes you're gone and blames me." Link's teeth flashed white in the darkness as he smiled. "All received, boss. We wouldn't want that." Dawn found all four up early and preparing to hike, Stalker and Link conspicuously missing the pistols they had worn during the night before. As the glow of the dawn sun began to brighten the Atacama skyline, they began their climb of Parinacota. Classified as a Class F climb, Parinacota was an easy climb, suitable for beginners, with a recommended ascent time of 6 hours and a descent of 4. Stalker intended to use it as a good warm-up climb before tackling the more difficult Pomerape climb the following day. Almost as soon as they set out, the group encountered scree slopes, with every step having to be made through loose, ankle-deep rock mixed with ancient deposits of black ash. As they climbed higher, the scree diminished and the temperature fell, the ground becoming more rocky, intermixed with areas of snow. As they climbed above 5,000 meters, they encountered the first patches of penitence. Penitents, named after the tall conical hats worn by local priests, were a product of the dry Andean air combined with regular winds and the sun's rays. The result in the right conditions were fields of closely packed, icy spear-like blades of hardened snow and ice rising up from the ground. Fields of penitence varied in size from between a few centimeters to several meters and represented a considerable and potentially hazardous obstacle to climbers when they were thick. Forming single file, they pushed through the penitence field, everyone being careful not to get cut by or snagged on the sharp ice shards. As they pushed through their third field of penitence, approaching the summit, Stalker turned to check on the progress of the others and immediately spied movement further down the slope. Coming up the trail behind them were 6 people. All appeared to be male, although at the distance Stalker couldn't be certain. But by the speed they were coming up the slope, they were all very fit. As Link passed Stalker, he held up 6 fingers. Stalker nodded in reply. 5 hours since leaving their base camp, Stalker crested the summit. Not bad, he thought. The group's combined fitness had shaved an hour off the recommended time. Stalker took a moment to look around. Although not high by mountaineering standards, the view from the summit was nothing short of spectacular. It felt like being on the roof of the world. Below, the brown expanse of the Atacama stretched as far as the eye could see, while opposite, at almost the exact same height, the twin peak of Pomerape loomed. A giant funnel from the Earth's furnace in a cloudless blue sky. Stalker's thoughts, however, were not on the view. Below them, the other unknown group were getting closer by the minute. As Zoe and Janet took some pictures and caught their breath, Link and Stalker examined the approaching group. There were 6 men, all wearing cold weather clothes and hiking equipment. All also wore woolen full-face scarves, gloves, and reflective sunglasses, attire that, although matching, was not entirely unusual for a cold weather climb. The group also carried matching small backpacks, but otherwise appeared to be unencumbered. Stalker judged they were about 20 minutes from the top. Zoe appeared at Stalker's side. "Problem?" Stalker tried to drop the frown he was wearing, but failed. "Possibly. Let's get moving, see if our friends follow." As one, they moved off around the deep crater-like rim of the volcano. They had just reached the other side when the group of 6 men emerged onto the summit. Then, without even pausing to admire the view, they began to move around the rim towards Stalker, Link, Zoe, and Janet. Well, that answers that thought, Stalker. Stalker looked around. There was no cover on the summit, and he had no idea who he was up against. Their only option was to get off the summit and into some cover. Stalker spied a large penitence field further down the slope, and with Link in the lead, they headed for it. As they departed the summit, Stalker saw the unknown group break into a jog, then unknown men, clearly guessing that the game was up. Linko, as one, they sprinted for the nearest cover, a dense field of 3-meter-high penitents. Just as Stalker entered the field, he heard the distinctive pops of gunfire. At the same moment, bullets began to impact all around him, sending chips of ice flying in little puffs of white. Stalker dropped to the ground and out of sight, then quickly reached into his backpack and drew his Z8A pistol from its holster. Link, I don't want to get pinned here together. Cover Zoe and Janet. I'll try to slow them down. Link nodded and moved off, keeping low, his own pistol in hand, Zoe and Janet following. The 2 ladies unarmed, as they had not brought their issue sidearms to Aurica. Stalker saw Zoe turn as she went to follow Link, her expression fathomless, her eyes torn. With a gentle wave of his hand, Stalker signaled her to go. Zoe followed the gesture wordlessly, her eyes ablaze with unsaid words. Stalker waited for 5 seconds, then quickly stole a look up the slope. The men were close now and coming on fast. All were carrying some type of compact automatic weapon. Stalker counted to 5 again, then pistol ready popped up and opened fire. Stalker got off 6 quick shots. The range was long for a pistol, but Stalker saw 2 of the men go down immediately, indicating he had scored at least 2 hits, the rest of the men scattering in surprise. Stalker dropped low and started to move into the ice field. A moment later, a torrent of automatic fire swept where he had been, one of the tall penitents being cut in half and toppling to the ground with a dull thud. Then somewhere behind him, amongst the ice, a grenade went off with a crump. Stalker paused. The air was filled with shouts, and Stalker quickly recognized the sounds of a well-trained and experienced team. The men didn't panic after being fired upon, and instead were giving clear verbal commands. Stalker quickly popped his head up again before dropping out of sight. Stalker swore. All 6 men were back on their feet, the 2 he had hit appearing only lightly injured. 2 were moving left and right to cover the flanks of the field and cut off any escape. Another was providing overwatch, while the remaining 3 were moving cautiously into the ice. Stalker quickly grabbed his handheld netlink from his bag, but saw immediately that he had no communication signal, no way to call for help. Stalker realized that the group must have had a portable jamming device with them. Stalker swore again in frustration. He was in a bad position, and he knew it. Keeping low, Stalker quickly moved into middle of the field and found the others, all of them concealed as best they could be behind ice pillars. You think he'll wait us out? Should only take about 3 months before this ice melts, Link said in a serious voice, Janet promptly elbowing him in the ribs. I've got a clip and a half left, then I'm dry. How many rounds you got, Link? Stalker asked. 2 full mags. If I had known I was going to get into a firefight, I might have brought more, or a machine gun. Stalker looked sideways at Link. The man never seemed to lose his sense of humor. Stalker came to snap decision. Regardless of their lack of firepower, they could not stay where they were for long. They had to seize the initiative. Stalker loaded his remaining fresh magazine into his pistol, double-checked a round was chambered, and handed it to Zoe. If anyone comes near without shouting the password, shoot them. Zoe smoothly checked the pistol, then looked up, her face determined. What's the password? Stalker winked. Princess, of course, Link on me. They moved in the direction Stalker had seen the 3 men advancing, a quick look above the level of the ice revealing no sign of them. The men invisible as long as they kept below the forest of ice pillars. Stalker quickly explained his plan to Link, and then they split up. Reaching into his backpack, Stalker grabbed the only weapon he had at his disposal, a mountain climber's ice pick, and waited. About 20 seconds later, Stalker began to hear a continuing volley of shots from his left, the direction Link had gone. Counting to 3, Stalker raised his head above the level of the penitents. Immediately, Stalker saw the 3 men, their dark-colored clothing standing out against the ice. They had spread out to sweep the field and were now standing up above the level of the ice, searching for the source of the shooting. The distraction of the firing gave Stalker all the time he needed. Staying low, Stalker made a beeline for the nearest of the 3 men. Moving as fast as he could through the jagged ice spire, Stalker was on a man before he put his head back down. Coming around the corner of a penitence like a meteor, Stalker swung the ice, picked two-handed, and buried it into the man's skull, knocking off his reflective sunglasses. The man crumpled to the ground before he could issue a cry. The sound of a single shot fired from his submachine gun due to a convulsion of the nerves and dying man's hand lost in the continuing shooting by Link. Stalker snatched up the man's weapon, a P240 SMG, and after a quick magazine check placed it on the ground close by. Stalker then rifled through the dead man's clothing, quickly finding what he was looking for. With the skill of a professional warrior, Stalker activated and threw the grenades one after the other. 4 of the small but lethal explosive devices sailing through the air to land amongst the ice. To each of the last place he had seen the other 2 men in the field of penitence. Stalker was counting on the men's caution as they swept the ice for their targets, caution that would slow down their movements. Stalker's aim was perfect. In rapid succession, all 4 grenades detonated, hundreds of little pieces of lethally designed shrapnel arcing out around the point of impact to form the weapon's kill zones. A fraction of a second after the blast, Stalker was already running for the nearest blast point. Coming to the blast zone, Stalker entered a scene of destruction. Both grenades had landed close together. In a roughly circular area of the penitence field 5 meters across had been almost leveled. P240 at the ready, Stalker swept the debris, stepping carefully as the ground was thick with chunks of ice and the stumps of penitence. It didn't take Stalker long to find his target. Near the center of the mass of icy rubble, the ice began to turn red. A quick check revealed that the man was dead, the effect of the grenades on an unarmored target devastating and utterly lethal. Taking a moment to secure the dead man's P240, Stalker moved towards the second blast zone. Before he reached it, there was a burst of gunfire from ahead through the ice, Stalker recognizing the sound of a P240 on full auto and the return fire of a Z8 pistol. Emerging into the second blast zone, cautiously Stalker spied Link crouching behind the thick base of a shattered penitence, pistol in hand. Following the direction of Link's gaze, Stalker spied a red trail in the shattered ice, leading away from Link and back in the direction of the edge of the field. With Link covering, Stalker moved up to the edge of the blast zone, but the wounded man was gone, excited shouts informing both Link and Stalker that he had made it out. A moment later, a grenade sailed overhead and landed in the clearing. Down! The grenade went off with a crump amongst the ice. Stalker felt the concussion wave buffet him and heard pieces of shrapnel pass close with an audible zing as they passed through the air. Even as the echoes of the blast faded, Stalker sprang to his feet and moved back into the ice, relieved to see his seemingly uninjured Link following suit. As they reached cover, both spun and looked for an attack, but none came. Link, how many rounds you got left? None. I was counting on you to come and save my arse. What took you so long? Link retorted from behind a nearby penitence. Sorry, I thought you scout sniper types knew better than to waste all your ammunition. Stalker worked his way to Link and gave him the second man's P240 and ammunition. Then together they fell back to where Zoe and Janet were waiting. How many more grenades do you think they have left? Asked Zoe. 4 tangos still standing for a man. They have used at least one. Say 15, replied Stalker. There was a sharp crump nearby, followed by the sound of shattering ice. Make that 14, said Link dryly. Stalker quickly assessed the situation. Their attackers had changed tactics. Instead of trying to sweep the penitence field, they were now using grenades to clear it systematically, and by the size of the field, Stalker knew they had almost enough grenades to do it. Stalker also knew that once they had pushed them into a corner and pinpointed their location, it would be over very quickly. Somewhere close by, another grenade went off. Stalker clenched his fists in frustration. They were in a no-win situation, and he didn't believe in no-win situations. Then it got worse. Stalker felt his eyes, throat, and nose begin to sting, and looking around saw the others also beginning to feel the same effects. Through rapidly watering eyes, Stalker saw thin wisps of white gas moving through the ice. Tear gas, Stalker remarked simply, his heart sinking. With quick wits and his and Link's superior weapon skill, there had still been a glimmer of hope that they could have outfought their attackers. That hope, along with Stalker and Link's ability to see, was now gone. These guys really know how to pack. Is there anything they don't have? Link said to no one in particular, a hint of anger cracking through his normally implacable humor. They had no defense against the gas, and as another grenade went off, Stalker found that he was having trouble seeing the sights of the P-240 he was holding. It was over. Another grenade went off, this time close enough to shower them all with ice. Stalker looked at Link through blurry eyes. His friend nodded and started getting ready. Stalker dropped his pack before gripping Zoe's hand tight. While we distract them, you and Janet try and get clear, and don't stop for anything. Stalker saw Zoe's jaw set defiantly in a way he knew well, and he interrupted her before she could resist. That's not a request. No arguments. Get ready to run, and you keep running. Stalker knew their chances of survival were now slim to none, but he had to try. You ready, Link? Ready, boss. As one Stalker and Link leapt to their feet. Then the world exploded. In quick succession, 6 heavy impacts rocked the ice field. Stalker and Link dropped back to the ground mid-stride. Stalker initially thought they had been hit by grenades and anxiously looked around to see that everyone was okay. Then another series of impacts shook the mountainside. As the echoes died, Stalker realized that the explosions had been too big to be grenades. Abruptly, the air was torn by several long bursts of heavy cannon fire, and through his blurry eyes, Stalker saw the shape of some type of aircraft sweep overhead. The cacophony of noise intensified as it was joined by bursts of small arms fire, both Stalker and Link instantly recognizing the distinctive reports of ASBRs. After a few minutes, everything fell quiet, and Stalker desperately blinked his eyes rapidly, trying without success to clear them of the effects of the gas. Close by, Stalker heard the sound of ice crunching underfoot, and he spun to face the direction of the noise, P-240 at the ready. Identify yourself, or I'll open fire, Stalker called out, deciding he had little to lose by revealing his location. Friendlies, you all okay? Anyone hurt? Anyone need medical attention? Stalker stood cautiously, Link covering with his P-240. To Stalker's relief, even through his impaired vision, he recognized someone wearing the black armor of the Terra Nova. 5 minutes later, Stalker and the others finally began to regain their sight. Their eyes flushed out with saline solution from one of the soldiers' medical kits. Stalker looked up to see the grim face of Lee Waters. Not that I don't appreciate you dropping by, Lee, but how did you find us? Waters raised an eyebrow. You don't think I became a company intelligence officer by not knowing where my CO is, do you? Stalker shook his head, unsure whether Waters was being serious or joking. Zoe and Janet wrapped their arms around Waters, giving him a hug, both thanking him for arriving when he did. Stalker almost laughed at Waters' stiff posture. The veteran soldier, clearly uncomfortable with the open displays of feminine gratitude. Link got to his feet, and Waters took a step backwards. You hug me, and second in command, or not, I'll kill you, Waters said seriously. Never crossed my mind, said Link, a hint of a mischievous grin on his face. Waters grumbled something unintelligible and began walking off. Lee, called Stalker. Do you know who they were? Why don't you follow me and find out? Grumbled Waters over his shoulder. Stalker and the others looked at each other, then hurried to catch up to Waters. Emerging from a ruined penitence field, Stalker's eyes were immediately drawn to a skirmisher assault gunship that was perched at an awkward angle on the slope nearby. Around it was gathered a dozen Terra Nova troops, Stalker, noting from their insignia that they came from several different companies and units. Laid out nearby was a row of bodies, the clothing identifying them as the men who had attacked the group. As he approached, Stalker counted 5 corpses. The 6th man, Stalker realized, was sitting on the ground by the skirmisher, bound and bleeding from a head wound, but very much alive. Has he said anything? Waters shook his head and answered to Zoe's question. Stalker took in the man carefully. He was sullen, staring at the ground. But Stalker sensed it wasn't from regret at being captured, but rather from a regret that he had failed to kill his targets. With a suddenness that made Stalker step slightly back, the man looked up into his face, and for the first time Stalker saw his eyes that burned with hatred. "He's Red Legion," Stalker remarked, his words more a statement than a question. "Not this shit again," spat Link. "They have to be running out of bad guy by now." "Apparently not," replied Waters curtly. "Reports of officers being killed by Red Legion hit squads started coming in late last night. Seems they especially targeted the assault divisions and the fleet. That's when I organized a scratch unit to come and get you." "How bad is it?" asked Janet, her voice echoing the thoughts of the group. "Some are dead, some are alive, Missy. We lost a lot of good people," replied Waters gravely. Once again, the Red Legion had reared its ugly head. Stalker wondered if they would ever succeed in cutting out a cancer that seemed to be everywhere and yet nowhere. The Red Legion had showed that it still had teeth and that it still had eyes and ears in high places. Stalker knew they had been lucky. The team sent to murder them had been good, but they had also taken their time. They had waited to attack until they were on the mountain, probably wanting to throw the bodies in the volcanic crater to hide them. When they did move, they used caution and didn't attack aggressively, a delay that ultimately had cost them their objective and their lives. Humans killing humans at a time when war of freedom raged against an alien enemy. The very thought made Stalker almost incoherent with rage. Did the Red Legion really think there was a place for them under Daimos rule as anything other than slaves? Could they not see beyond their own petty desires to view the big picture? Did they think about anyone or anything beyond themselves at all? Stalker unclenched and clenched his fists subconsciously at the thought. As always in regards to the Red Legion, there were no answers, only questions.